recitation of the Heart Sutra, which most of you are quite familiar with. We might talk about the Heart Sutra a little bit here, but I'm actually going to be doing a course on the Heart Sutra in the new year as well. So we're not just getting this dose of emptiness this year, but we're going to continue in January with a 2-month course on the Heart Sutra. So let's go ahead and recite that together. Thank you, Mary, for putting that up there. As you recite this, try to bring emptiness to mind as best as you can as we recite these words. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time the Bhagawan was dwelling on Massive Vulture's Mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Mary, okay, thanks. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the 3 times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagawan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagawan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagawan. So now we'll do the praise to Manjushri. So some of you might recall that we did this previously in another class. There's a whole praise that follows, and then there'll be the mantra of Manjushri on the next page. And when we recite that mantra, we'll try to do it about 21 times. And then there's the syllable D, that is the ending syllable of that. And you'll do that if you can 108 times. I'll try to count that out myself, but it'll be hard for you to follow along and get the exact pronunciation. But anyway, and then after you say your last D, hopefully on one breath, then you inhale and kind of bring in the power of that mantra into your heart center to be blessed by that mantra. And then there's a little closing 2 lines after that. Homage to my Lama and protector, Venerable Manjushri, who holds at his heart a scripture symbolic of his seeing all as it is, whose pure genius shines like the sun, unclouded by the 2 obscurations, who, with compassion like a father for his only child, teaches with 60-fold eloquence, all beings imprisoned in cyclic existence, groping in the darkness of ignorance and overwhelmed by suffering, you whose thunder-like proclamation of the perfection of wisdom arouses us from the stupor of our afflictions and frees us from the iron chains of karma, who wield wisdom's sword, vanquishing the darkness of ignorance, hewing down our every sprout of suffering. You who are primordially pure, gone to the end of the 10 grounds, complete embodiment of every excellence, whose princely body is graced with the 112 adornments, O Manjushri, to you I bow, dispel the darkness of my mind. Omarapatsanadi, 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 Omarapatsana. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness of my mind's confusion. Grant me the light of self-assured intelligence that I may see into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them.
Gemma, I'll offer this because we're offering this short mandala. Everyone, this is what we're offering. We're requesting mandala for Gen Don. We're so fortunate, so thankful that he is back teaching for us. Here we go. Sajipuki Jushing Metok Tramri Rablingji Ni Degen Padi Sange Jing Du Mi Te Uai Drokunam Dag Jing La Chopar Shok. O holy and perfect pure Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratnam Mandalakam Niryateami.
Okay, and then we'll recite refuge and bodhicitta. Thank you, Mary, for that. So again, the first two lines are renewing our sense of refuge, safe direction in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And then the last two lines, generating our motivation of bodhicitta for these teachings, which we'll also meditate on shortly. Let's recite this once in English and then twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyan gi pe sanam gi dola penchir sangye du parashog sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki Chenyan Gipe Sanam Gi Dola Penchir Sangye Drupar Sho. And it's really wonderful to see you all again here tonight to return to Tupta Norbuling. So let's get started with a short meditation just to focus our minds a little and then to set our motivation of bodhicitta. So this will just be a few minutes, give us a chance to do some meditation together. So let's start with focusing on the breath. As usual, just find a way to work with the breath that's suitable for your mind. If you need a suggestion, I generally encourage people to work with the sensation around the nostrils where you feel the air coming in and out as you inhale and exhale. Just making that your meditation object. Try to stay present with that sensation as best as you can. But in any of our meditations, we want to check in occasionally. And if we see that the mind has wandered, that we've gotten distracted, then at that time we correct our meditation, bringing the mind back, letting go of whatever it was that caused us to lose the breath. And so even if we have to do this many times over the next few minutes, that's perfectly fine. Just training our minds to be a bit less distracted. So I'll ring the chime to begin the meditation, a few minutes in silence, and then I'll lead you in a short reflection to set bodhicitta motivation. So now let's set our motivation together. And recall the teaching that tells us that just as a bird needs two wings to fly to reach its destination, so too do we need the two wings that the Buddha taught that are the two main elements of our path. In this course, we're mostly going to be examining the wisdom element, that wisdom wing that is so important. It is crucial, really, to getting to the destination of enlightenment that we seek. But we could never fly there with just that one wing. We could never reach enlightenment with purely wisdom alone. It must be accompanied by the compassionate motivation, the method wing. Otherwise, we would attain that wisdom, realizing emptiness that we're going to be studying, and it would perhaps only be used for our own welfare. Although the Buddha taught a path to achieve that, that's the path of individual liberation, whereas we want to ideally have this more universal motivation. Otherwise, we can't possibly reach enlightenment. So we're going to set our motivation of bodhicitta as a means of accompanying this study of wisdom, so that we assure that we always have this compassionate motivation behind what we are doing here together. So as we saw in the praise to Manjushri, recall that all beings are in this prison of samsara, suffering going from life to life, every one of them under the control of their ignorance, thereby under the control of the other delusions, as well as the karma that arises from those. Our concern should be universal, not just for ourselves in studying this topic, because all beings are in the exact same predicament as ourselves. And moreover, every one of those beings has been incredibly kind, has contributed to your welfare in unbelievable ways. So the answer to that, the way to repay that kindness of all these kind mother sentient beings, is to become enlightened for their sake, to engage in this study with this exalted mind of compassion and wisdom that is the antidote to all of our problems and difficulties, but will put us in the best possible position to benefit all sentient beings. So we thereby generate the motivation of bodhicitta that strives to use this time we have together while we are focused on wisdom to accompany it with the compassionate motivation that seeks to enact the welfare of each and every single being without exception, so that in this way all beings can become enlightened through what we are doing here tonight. So hold that motivation of bodhicitta, a way of complementing our study of wisdom with the perfect motivation of compassion, this altruistic intent to benefit all sentient beings. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about this course, and we're going to go through the outline shortly to let everyone know kind of what we're going to be covering over these. I think it's about 7 or 8 sessions. I can't remember. Maybe it's 7. Anyway, I did design this course last year when I was asked by Vajrapani Institute to come there and teach it was started on a Thursday night, went through a Sunday lunch, a little retreat weekend on emptiness. And so in that context, I was, of course, guiding meditations, and we were doing other activities around all of this. But I'm hoping that we can do some meditation as part of this course. I mean, I really put these verses together and this whole structure so that it could support your doing meditation on emptiness and exploring this topic. So that's the real intention behind this course, is to help us to rely upon these great masters of the past, all of their words of wisdom, and of course, at times, even the words from the actual sutras of the Buddha, so that we can actualize this wisdom in our own minds. There is a text that is available that you may have seen when you went to come through the link tonight for the class. If you click on that and go to Dropbox, you can receive the text. And if you print it out correctly, it's like every other page is another side of a booklet, but you do have to have your printer set up to print it that way so that it comes out in that fashion. You can then have your page 1 all the way through the final page 12. There's a few pages for notes in there because I had extra pages when I printed it or put it together. But this is all the verses that I'm going to be going through during this course. So if you want to have that printed out to be able to write any notes on there, it might be useful. But my intent is that you'll have this as actually something, again, that you can use in the future to meditate on emptiness. And I have a little nice cover that I may, I'll make that available to Mary so she can post that out there too. If you wanted to print it, I printed mine out on some little cardstock so that it was a little more durable. But you can put that together and make your own little booklet out of that if you wish. Um, I don't know if we'll do what I did in the retreat, which was I also led a Manjushri practice. We had the praise to Manjushri that we did at the beginning, but I think it might be too much to try to fit into these brief sessions that we have. So I'll probably be mostly teaching and occasionally a short meditation on the verses that I've covered. We'll see how that works for these evening classes. So let me go ahead and pull up the outline for this text or for this course so you have some idea. But maybe, before we begin that, I'd actually like to go ahead and start with the very first verse that is in the text, which is simply a verse of homage. And it actually comes from the very final chapter of, went 2 slides rather than 1. It comes from the very final chapter of the wonderful text by Nagarjuna that's called Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way that I will be quoting frequently throughout this course. And there's a wonderful translation of it that some of you have read by Geshe Ngawang Samten and Jay Garfield. This is, again, the very final verse. It's kind of interesting because he does make homage at the very beginning to the Buddha and then at the very end, where he says, I prostrate to Gautama, the Buddha, who through compassion taught the exalted Dharma, which leads to the relinquishment of all views. So it kind of brings in once more this idea that we just meditated on of the combination of wisdom and compassion. The Buddha's compassion itself that caused his teaching of the Dharma to us and all beings, as well as the compassion we need to generate to become just like the Buddha. But the purpose of this exalted Dharma, this encompasses kind of the 2 main ideas of compassion and wisdom in it. And again, the wisdom that we're going to be studying, this exalted Dharma, is what leads to the relinquishment of all views, meaning all of the incorrect views that we have of reality. So I thought what I'm going to be doing with a number of these verses is where I do have a published commentary by somebody, for example, the commentary that Tsongkhapa did on this verse. I'm sharing some of that with you for this verse. I'm not going to share all of it, but I think it's useful to go back to these commentaries frequently so that we know what's said about them from a more scholastic point of view. So this is what Tsongkhapa said in that Ocean of Reasoning. He says, this is a prostration to the unparalleled teacher who gave this teaching. What Dharma did he teach? He taught the Dharma which is called exalted because it is the Dharma of the exalted Aryas. Aryas are those beings who've had direct insight into emptiness, this non-conceptual wisdom that we're going to talk about shortly. And because it is laudable, since it completely eliminates the sufferings of cyclic existence. It's exalted because it is the wisdom that will cut through the root of samsara and thereby remove all sufferings. Alternatively, because it is excellent, it is called exalted. So this is the quality of this Dharma. It is excellent. It is excelled. It's the unexcelled teaching, in fact, of the reality of truth of how things actually exist. It is called the Dharma also because it holds one back from falling from the cliffs of the views, according to which cyclic existence and nirvana are the reference of the representations, that which is to be abandoned, which is cyclic existence or samsara, and that which is to be achieved, nirvana, respectively. So we can even have false views of these, of course, in samsara. state that we're in, we are holding to the view of things to inherently exist, this extreme view. And there are those who hold that nirvana is a view of non-existence, of annihilation. And so again, we can see that even these two states of samsara and nirvana can be misunderstood in terms of incorrect views. And this is because the word dharma, it's holding us back from the cliffs of those views. Dharma is explained to be derived from dara, which means to hold. And in fact, the word dharma is usually talked about as that which holds us back from suffering, that which holds us in the state where we can be free of that due to having the correct views. This exalted dharma is peaceful. That is, it is the pacification of conceptual construction and is free from the eight extremes, the extremes of cessation and arising, annihilation and permanence, coming and going, and distinction and identity. Now, I'm not going to go into a whole commentary on those things, but this first idea that it is the pacification of our conceptual construction, what this means is that we're going to go into this throughout this course is all of the false thoughts that we have about things, the views, the ways that we construct things conceptually that are in contrast to how things actually exist. And moreover, it is free from these eight extremes. Now, why they are mentioned here at the very end is as a real kind of a reconnection with the very first verses of Nagarjuna's text, which are essentially these. There's a praise that is made at the beginning, similar to this ending homage, where Nagarjuna says, I prostrate to the perfect Buddha, the best of all teachers, who taught that that which is dependent origination, dependent arising, which we'll be getting into more in this course, the nature of everything that arises in dependence upon various factors. The nature, that which is dependent origination is without cessation, without arising, meaning without any inherent cessation, any inherent arising. It's without any inherent annihilation, any inherent permanence, any inherent coming, going, distinction or difference, identity or sameness. And as was mentioned in the commentary by Tsongkhapa, it's peaceful, free from fabrication. We've completely pacified all of these mistakes that we're making in terms of our conceptual constructions. So that was just to refer back to those verses. And as I said, it kind of creates the end of an arc from the very beginning of that text all the way to the end. And then there's just a little bit more that I'm going to share as a commentary on this homage that is the starting point for our study of this topic of emptiness in this course. The motivation behind the teaching of this Dharma is not the desire to receive offering, services, or reciprocal benefits, and it's certainly not also to, benefit just oneself, but it is the great compassion that embraces suffering transmigrators. And of course, this is that other wing that we meditated on that is a key component to having our wisdom of emptiness become the cause for our complete enlightenment and thereby the enlightenment and liberation of all beings. So what is the purpose of this Dharma? Seeing the view through which one grasps the representation of the two kinds of self as the source of all faults, this erroneous view that we have in regard to the person, which is one kind of self, the identity of the I, the person that we cling to so tightly for ourselves, and we also, of course, cling to others as inherently existent. And then the other kind of self is the self of phenomena, which means everything other than persons, because we also have the same mistake with regard to computers and chairs and all the other things that exist in this world. So with seeing that the view through which one grasps these two kinds of self as the source of all faults, the Buddha gave this teaching so that one might relinquish all views through which one grasps these representations, these false ways of looking at things. So that's a little introduction, and I'm not going to talk much more about that verse, but maybe we will do that verse actually at the beginning of each class before we start our investigation of that night's topics. In fact, Geshe Sherab often recites that verse in the Tibetan before he teaches, and it's a verse that His Holiness the Dalai Lama often recites prior to his teachings. So it's a kind of nice way to recall our indebtedness to the Buddha for giving us the way of relinquishing all of these views. So these are the topics that we're going to be examining. I've got 6 topics over the course of 7 classes. Some of these will take a little bit longer, some may take a little bit less. But nonetheless, the very first topic that I think will cover us entirely tonight is why we need to realize emptiness. to really review that to some degree for those of you who are already familiar, but also to use some of the verses that I put together as a way to be able to reflect on that. Again, all these verses are intended to be used in your meditation. The second topic we'll look at hopefully next week, examining what exists and what doesn't exist, to kind of get into this idea that there are things that we are adhering to that are not in touch with reality, that there are some things that do not exist and yet there are things that do. This is where we'll actually introduce this whole concept of dependent arising. The third and the fourth will be those two kinds of views that we have in terms of a self of persons and a self of phenomena, so that we understand how to refute the incorrect view we have of that, of the identity of the person, as well as the inherent identity of everything other than people. Then we'll look at, towards the end, some analogies for contemplation that come from the Vajrakutta Sutra, that wonderful verse that we recite frequently on Sundays, a star, a visual aberration, and so on. Quite familiar with that, I'm sure. We're going to look at those. Rinpoche's given some teachings, and we can use that verse as an amazing way to contemplate the illusory nature of things as well as the impermanent nature of things. And then I want to touch a little bit on compassion and emptiness at the very end, once more coming back around to tie this all into compassionate motivation. So let's go on to the very first verse. This is from chapter 9 of Master Shantideva's text, which I'm hoping to teach next year actually for the groups in New York and Miami on Monday nights. I'll be teaching that probably about mid-year. It's an amazing chapter. That is the wisdom chapter. As you know, Shantideva's text is the Bodhisattva's way of life, and so he teaches on 5 of the perfections in terms of a chapter each, but then he also goes into the first one, the perfection of generosity, here and there. But this is from the 9th chapter, which is on the perfection of wisdom. The very first verse of that chapter, Shantideva says, the Muni, meaning the Buddha, Muni means capable one, able one, taught all these branches. Everything that was taught prior to this in his text, which of course is all the other bodhisattva practices, the development of bodhicitta, all of this, he taught everything else he taught for the purpose of wisdom. Therefore, those who desire to pacify suffering should generate wisdom. Now, I could have shared a commentary from Gyaltsab in regard to this verse, but I decided not to do that. I want to talk a little bit about some of the elements that are in this verse, though, so we can kind of use it again as a way to meditate on the need for us to generate wisdom. Because if we do desire to pacify suffering for ourselves and for others, we absolutely need that. So Geshe Japa Tekchok in Transforming the Heart, which is actually that's the earlier title, but I think it's called something like Transforming Adversities into Courage or into Joy or something. I can't remember the name of it, but he talks about kind of the way that we take a look at the Buddha's teachings to be able to discern the truth of them for ourselves, to be able to use the Buddha's teachings as a means to overcome our false views and thereby overcome our suffering, as well as help others to do the same. So he says the Buddha said we should not just take his word on anything, but check for the truth of his teachings by way of 3 analyses. These are likened to the 3 types of analyses made by those that are buying gold. First, they check for the more obvious faults by rubbing gold, then for the less obvious ones by cutting it, and finally for the subtlest impurities by burning it, melting it, and so this is the analogy that's used for how we should go from a coarser view of what we're examining, then to something subtler, and then to even something quite subtle, so that we make sure that if we see anything that is erroneous in the Buddha's teachings, we can throw them out. This is what the Buddha essentially said, is that, it's up to us to find the gold for ourselves, to really do that work so that these teachings can be seen as upholding truth. When I first came to Buddhism, that was very much a comfort to me because, of course, I came from a Catholic tradition where I was asked to believe in a lot of things, regardless of whether there was some reasoning, some rational approach to them that I was encouraged to engage in. In fact, I was discouraged from engaging in that frequently because it was much more of a blind faith. Of course, in Buddhism, we see that faith is a virtue that we can develop, but it's generally on the basis of our investigation of the teachings. So we develop initially really a sort of clear faith when we begin to study emptiness and begin to discern what it means and its relationship to the Buddha's teachings. We develop an aspirational faith that has the quality of desiring to achieve that realization, to know this topic inside and out so we can actualize that mind, knowing emptiness in the most direct way. And then we finally have a faith of conviction, or a convinced faith, that comes about through our deeper investigation into the Dharma and our experience with it. And we begin to have a greater appreciation for the teachings on emptiness. In fact, I was teaching last weekend to the folks out in Reno, and I was bringing up the emptiness teachings as a way of combating anger. And they were talking about how difficult it is in the moment of anger to actually bring to mind emptiness. And of course, it's all a product of our familiarity with this, as well as our own conviction in it through our deeper investigation. So we're going to talk next in terms of how do we go about investigating this topic. I've just told you that it's all in your own hands to discern whether emptiness is correct or not. But we need to kind of, again, go into deeper reasoning, into deeper investigation. He says, again, continuing with Geshe Jampa Tekchok, he says, the Buddha said, check my teachings in this way too. See if they are true or not. Make your understanding firm through reasoning, and do not believe on faith alone. And by here, he means maybe more, again, that starting point of our faith where we might just become a little bit clearer and have a faith of belief that isn't really grounded in deeper conviction. But Lama Tsongkhapa also stressed this, he says, this instruction gives us so much freedom. It is really marvelous advice. And as I said earlier, that was my experience as well, is that I was told it's up to me to investigate these teachings. If I find them not to be true, then thank you very much. Happy to go on my way. Buddha, will won't be upset if I don't believe his teachings. But I can assure you from my own experience that these teachings do hold water if we are actually committed to investigating them, as we're going to try to do through this course. So this boils down, in essence, when we talk about developing our reasoning mind, to three types of wisdom. The very first one is what all of you are doing right now, hopefully, wisdom from listening. And this also would include, in our day and age, certainly reading, watching videos, doing whatever you can to absorb as many teachings in this context on emptiness that you can. Of course, we have many teachings of the Buddha that we can listen to, but I'm going to try to relate everything to our own understanding of emptiness. But listening to teachings on emptiness are really very important. One thing I always stress when I teach on this topic is, first of all, I have no great realizations of emptiness, so don't be mistaken on that whatsoever. My suggestion is always to try to receive teachings if you can. You can listen to them on the internet. You can find them at FPMT's website frequently, but you essentially listen to teachings from great masters who we can assume have realized this topic. Like when Lama Zopa Rinpoche talks about emptiness, it's really very tasty for me, at least, because I get the feeling of his experience is being transmitted as well as the words of that teaching. So we benefit greatly by this first level of wisdom, where we're simply bringing the awareness of teachings into our sphere of experience through listening, through hearing them. But it's interesting, they already say there's some level of wisdom there. And that's because, of course, as we're listening to the teachings, we are absorbing them through our own intellectual process. But that's not the ending point by any means. And just listening to teachings on emptiness is not going to get you very far. The second of these three wisdoms, the second wisdom is the wisdom that arises through thinking, contemplating, reflecting. Different words are used here. But this is really what, for most of us, our actual meditation is right now. Unless you have great meditative skill, most of the time you spend in analytical meditation, on emptiness at least, is in the second category. It is trying on these teachings, and we're going to go through a number of techniques of reasoning throughout this course. It's spending some time with them where you actually investigate and begin to gain some appreciation for whether those teachings are directing you towards that understanding of emptiness or not. Without reflecting on the teachings, we're never going to get to a deeper level of understanding. But already at this level, you can begin to see some difference in terms of how you are perceiving things and how you are perhaps lessening some of the attachment to the self, the person that we hold to and cling to so tightly. The third level of wisdom, though, is something that arises on the basis of meditation, and it's called wisdom from meditating. But by meditating here, we don't mean I'm speaking here for myself. Maybe again, all of you are great meditators, and I prostrate at your feet if you are. But for most of us, our time in meditation isn't this third level yet. This third level is where you have actually developed a much deeper meditative state. Through your stabilizing meditation, you've attained something approaching calm abiding, or at the level of calm abiding. Many of you have studied calm abiding with Geshe Sherab when he was teaching on it earlier in the Lamrim, middle-length Lamrim text. It set out the techniques for developing it in all of the Lamrim commentaries, what have you. So I'm not going to go into that meditation technique or by any means for this, but know that we gain great power if we can make our minds very stable, because then it means that we can keep our minds undistracted for as long as we wish, meditating on emptiness. Then you're going to have much greater focus. It's just like if you had a magnifying glass that had the full power of the sun and was being held very steady, then you could actually get something to burn. But if the magnifying glass is just kind of moving around and it's all over the place, you're never going to get a good amount of heat going in any one place. But if we keep everything very stable, then through the power of that sun shining through it, it can actually begin to burn things away. So this is the idea behind needing that first element of our stabilizing meditation. But we also have to have acquired a good analytical meditation, which is what we do in that second type of wisdom to some degree by meditating, reflecting upon these teachings. We begin that process, but then we have to unite that mind that we eventually develop into what's called special insight. Special insight together with calm abiding creates this union of a very powerful mind that is very penetrating. It's the culmination of these two types of meditation, our stabilizing meditation that brings us to that point where we can remain single-pointedly focused on an object, and then our understanding of emptiness, our insight into that has been generated at a deep level so that we can then have the combination of those two. So this is where our wisdom arising from meditation really begins, is when we have something approaching that, or at least, in that vein, that where the mind can be very, very stable, and we have the acuity, the insight to be able to know emptiness in a very precise way. So these are the three levels of wisdom. And of course, they are generated because we currently have the opposite of this wisdom. We have ignorance, or confusion as it's sometimes called. And ignorance here, as we're going to be exploring in this course, is not just not knowing. I can say I'm ignorant of a lot of things around quantum physics. I think Bob could enlighten me on a lot of things on quantum physics. But sometimes when people start talking quantum physics, it just kind of like goes over my head. Maybe that happens to you when you hear our teachings on emptiness. But nonetheless, I have an ignorance of quantum physics. It means I don't know something about it, really. I don't know that much about it at all. But here we're talking about something that is not just a not knowing, it's a misknowing. We are actually knowing things incorrectly. That would be like if I had read some bozo's view on quantum physics and they said it was all this, garbage, and I started believing in it. And I would be walking around telling everybody, oh, you have to learn about quantum physics. This is what it's all about. And I was passing along was that, again, if I have an incorrect view of quantum physics and I'm going around and saying quantum physics is something totally opposed to what it is, that's a whole nother level of ignorance, right? So essentially, when we talk about this ignorance that is operative in our own minds, it is not just misknowing, or I'm sorry, not just not knowing, it is a misknowing. It is thinking things exist in a way that is totally contrary to how they exist, the complete opposite to how they exist, all right? So again, in order to overcome that ignorance, we need very powerful wisdom. We need to develop it in this way, to generate good hearing, listening, being attentive to the teachings as best as we can. I always encourage people to take notes if you feel inclined to do so. That's why, again, I've made the text available to you so you can make notes in there. And then to, do what you can to kind of complement the studies through other readings. I didn't get time to put a little reading list together, but I will put one together and get that to Mary for next week as well. A few books that I might recommend that you would read along with this, and I'll try to direct you to certain passages as we go through the various techniques of realizing emptiness. But essentially, that's that first level of wisdom that's so important. And that begins to steer us in a different direction. And then when we get even more insight through our own reflection, contemplation on this topic, then we have an even stronger power of wisdom moving us away from our ignorance. And then eventually, when we develop the deeper wisdom that is realizing this, we generate a much more profound wisdom that will actually be reversing all the process of what's been caused by our own ignorance. So let me go through a little thing that's presented generally in the teachings when we study kind of Buddhist epistemology, how the mind knows, and the various levels of mind or types of awareness. And this is a little presentation that goes through how we abandon what we're calling here a wrong consciousness, which is a wrong view, which is essentially, again, our ignorance. We are viewing things incorrectly. We are looking at them from a vantage point of believing that they have inherent existence. We're going to use this term frequently. When one of the future classes, I'll introduce you to some other terms to refer to this. But we have this view that things have that type of existence and they don't. And we have this innately. This is carried from life to life and is something that we've always had. So essentially, there are 7 stages that we start off with a wrong consciousness, going all the way to an unmistaken realization of emptiness. And this passes through 7 stages again, not that it's absolute that we all go through every one of these. If we've had prior teachings on emptiness from another life, maybe in this life, we would jump pretty quickly through these. The very first one, of course, is our wrong view. Jeffrey Hopkins, commenting on this on Meditation on Emptiness, says, in their progress toward a non-conceptual direct cognition of emptiness, the yogi's consciousness of the nature of objects changes radically. First, the practitioner has a strong sense that objects inherently exist. This is a wrong consciousness. We're going to talk more about that ignorance in the next class when we get into what exists and what doesn't. We are holding things to exist in this inherent way. This is the wrong consciousness, the ignorance that is operative in a good part of our lives. I'd say it's operative the majority of our thinking moments in this life. The very next step all has to do with doubt. And when we have 3 steps actually of the 7 that are involved here. Doubt here is not a healthy doubt that, doubt here is a healthy doubt. Normally when we talk about doubt, we talk about an afflicted doubt that keeps us from progressing on the path. Here is a doubt that actually is an important part of our process of beginning to doubt what the wrong consciousness, the wrong view was holding to, and moving towards what is actually factual, what is actually in line with reality. So let's look at the commentary on these that comes from Jeffrey Hopkins. He says, then, through hearing about emptiness and or reflecting on its meaning, so there's already the first 2 levels of wisdom operative here. Sometimes even just by hearing about emptiness, you can already begin to move in this doubt process. But the conception of inherent existence for the practitioner weakens a little. And they merely suspect that objects don't exist inherently. This consciousness is the second of the 7, the first level of doubt, that is doubt not tending toward the fact. It's still tending towards what is erroneous. The practitioner here suspects that objects inherently exist, mostly. Kind of says, well, no, I don't think you're telling me quite the full truth. It's possible that they don't, but I still think they do. I still really believe that how things are appearing to me is totally real, totally in line with reality. So you still have, a tendency towards wrong awareness. Then the practitioner has the third level, which is the second type of doubt. We called it earlier equal doubt on that previous screen. It's doubt not tending and tending toward the fact equally. So it's kind of still holding on to some view that things inherently exist, but it's already beginning to move a little away from that, but it's sort of in an equal category. So here it means thinking that objects probably do and probably do not inherently exist. Then through study and extended meditation, the practitioner goes on to develop doubt tending toward the fact. So here the doubt is still there to some degree, doubt being a mind that is still double pointed. It's not intent on just one particular view yet, but it's tending towards the fact, thinking that objects probably do not inherently exist. but the practitioner, still is only suspecting so, not actually having any other greater conviction in that. As a practitioner continues to move through the process, though, after those 3 levels of doubt, we get into what are the actual correct views. The correct assumption, which is not yet incontrovertible, meaning it still could be changed if we were to encounter contrary evidence. But it becomes stronger there, and it becomes a bridge, a stepping stone to get us to inferential cognition, which is conceptual, and direct perception, which is non-conceptual. So let's look at what Jeffrey Hopkins says about these 3, which are, again, the higher level of our awareness, moving in the right direction towards this wisdom that arises from meditation. So further hearing, study, and extended meditation on the profound, meaning on emptiness, brings the practitioner to the point of number 5, correct assumption, a conceptual understanding of emptiness, which can be generated through the processes of inference. Inference is the tool we use to move our conceptual mind in a different direction, inferring the meaning of emptiness through various reasonings. But it's not yet inference in its full form. Why? Because it's not yet incontrovertible. Again, incontrovertible means that it's unconvincible. You could never, convince someone of a different view, a contrary view. We have to get things into that category in order to get to a full-fledged inferential cognition, awareness that is generated through the power of our inference. So Jeffrey Hopkins goes on to say, penetrating more and more the reasons for non-inherent existence, which once more is what we're studying in this course, the practitioner gains number 6, a conceptual cognition of emptiness, which is an inference. Again, inferential cognition is what this is usually called. An image or concept of the vacuity, the emptiness, which is an object's lack of inherent existence, appears to the practitioner. Thus, conceptual does not mean that they're sunk in discursiveness, that they're actually thinking about all kinds of things through that conceptual mind. They are simply knowing emptiness through a conceptual awareness. So let me take it off screen for just a moment to give a brief commentary on Buddhist epistemology. Buddhist epistemology is how the mind works, long word for a simple idea. And in Buddhist thinking, there is a difference between conceptuality and direct perception. Perception is knowing things in that direct way. In fact, they say all 5 of your sense consciousnesses, when they are valid, they've got a direct perception of whatever it is that is appearing to them. So right now, the screen that you're looking at and the colors and shapes that are on the screen, all of that is raw data that is appearing directly to your eye consciousness. It is your mental consciousness, and specifically your conceptual awareness within your mental consciousness, that processes all of that raw data. And it does that by means of a meaning generality, or a mental image. And I don't just mean visual things here. I was just talking about visual awareness of seeing the shapes and colors on the screen. We can also do this with things we receive through our ear. I can ask you all to think about the sound of the bell when I rang it earlier tonight, or the sound of your mother's voice, or something else. You can recall that, right? But you aren't actually hearing your mother's voice or the sound of the bell. You're all doing that through a mental image, through an idea of what that is. This makes our conceptual minds a bit mistaken, because we take a sort of snapshot of something, in a sense, either visual, audio, olfactory, tactile, what's the one missing? Mouth. What would we consider that? Gustatory. Anyway, you take something that is that information, and then you're working with an idea of it. And of course, this is why our conceptual minds get us into trouble, why ignorance is a conceptual mind and all of our delusions are a conceptual mind, is because they take that sort of snapshot of something and they start working with it as if it were the real thing. And then they overlay on it all these kinds of false ideas about it. We're going to talk about that more in a moment. But essentially, this idea of a conceptual image, it's not to say that conceptuality is therefore completely faulty because it's only working with mental images. It means that it just has a mistaken idea of things sometimes because it thinks that idea of it is the actual object. And that is only a mental snapshot of that object. So that's one level that conceptuality can be mistaken, but we can actually use our conceptual awareness, as we're doing in this course, to undermine all of our incorrect conceptions. This is why in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, conceptuality is not seen as the problem. In fact, there's a historical debate that occurred in Tibet between Kamala Shila and Mahayana Hashang. He was this great Chinese master who came from the Chan tradition, where they talked about removing all conceptuality from the mind. And Kamala Shila debated him and said, isn't having no conception in the mind a conception? And so he kind of defeated his opponent by showing how conception itself can even be involved in not having conception. So you can't get rid of all conception. And in fact, it's much better to use the tool of conception to actually rectify our minds. So this is what we're doing in this next step, this sixth of the 7 consciousnesses that I'm going through. Is you've already been using your conceptual mind up to this point. You know emptiness now through a meaning generality, that mental image, but you're knowing it correctly. You're knowing it as well as it exists in a sense, though we can still say you're only knowing an image of it versus the actual object. That doesn't happen until you get to the 7th of these wisdoms. But this is already a very powerful wisdom. Why? Because once more, it's incontrovertible. You've done enough meditation on emptiness up to this point to where you won't be convinced that things inherently exist at all. You have that awareness, which again is grounded in a deeper meditation ability to hold on to that realization, to make it a kind of a part of the fabric of our minds. So this is the idea behind this mental image and the way that we're knowing emptiness at this point. Again, it's an image or concept of that emptiness or vacuity, which is an object's lack of inherent existence, maybe the I, the person, lacking inherent existence, that appears to the practitioner. So again, conceptual doesn't mean that you're thinking about all sorts of things, having a discursive mind. It just means that's the medium through which you are knowing emptiness at this point. Already, again, very powerful mind. Therefore, at the moment of inference, the practitioner no longer is considering the preliminary factors of inference, but is realizing emptiness. In other words, you're not caught up in the reasoning necessarily at that point. You've already done the reasoning, and you are realizing the outcome of that, the lack of inherent existence of whatever object it was that you were focused on as the basis for emptiness. Then the practitioner attempts to remain in this conceptual cognition as long as possible, developing what I mentioned earlier, special insight based on calm abiding, so that he can then progress toward number 7, the first non-conceptual direct cognition of emptiness, in which even the image of that emptiness, that vacuity of concrete, findable existence, another way of referring to inherent existence, all of that has disappeared. The image of that, the mental image, has dropped away. And the subject, which is the subjective awareness, the wisdom consciousness, and the object, the emptiness of inherent existence, are like water put into water, undifferentiable. So this is what we are aiming for. In fact, this is often called a yogic direct perception, is on the basis of our really deep meditative awareness, that stability of mind that is calm abiding, united with a special insight, to change the very fabric of our minds completely through this direct experience of emptiness. Now, again, don't hold out for that to happen just through this course, because obviously it takes continual meditation, this lifetime, maybe many lifetimes to get to that. But this is such an important one for us to work on, and that's why, again, we're all here, is because we recognize that without using whatever we can to become familiar with this, we're never going to realize it. We're never going to get to that place where we actually accomplish that. And of course, this is so central to achieving our own liberation, but moreover to achieving enlightenment, as I mentioned in the meditation when we did our motivation. To get to the goal of enlightenment, we need both of these. We need our bodhicitta, our compassionate motivation, but we also need the wisdom realizing emptiness that will actually help us to progress to that goal. So let's go on to I think the next verse comes. This is from a Sutra of the Buddha, which is again on that first page of your little booklet, from the Sutra of Questions Posed by Rashtrapala. Because they don't know the meaning of shunyata, shunyata is the Sanskrit word for emptiness, or nirvana, which is the peace one attains when we have realized emptiness to the degree where it's removed all of our afflictions. Beings are forced to wander in samsara because Buddha has such great compassion for them, he leads them by using numerous reasons and methods. So this is, again, from the sutra, whoever the narrator is who is talking about the Buddha is saying that because we don't know the truth of reality, because we've never known nirvana, because we are still in samsara, we're going from life to life under the control of that factor. Buddha has such great compassion for us, all the enlightened beings looking upon us with eyes of endless compassion, never being separated from wanting to benefit us. And how do the Buddhas do that? Leading us through using numerous reasons and methods, seeing that we have to know the meaning of shunyata in order to be free from that. So, I often talk about when I teach on emptiness, the ignorance that's involved in emptiness and how we use that as sort of the root, understand it as the root of all of our suffering. I usually talk about it as being like a tree. A tree has roots in the ground, and this is where our ignorance is. It's the grounding upon which the entire tree is built. The trunk of the tree represents the various states of mind that arise from that ignorance. And we can have virtuous states of mind and we can have non-virtuous states of mind. Most of the other afflictions have fall into that category of non-virtue, like the mind of desire, the mind of anger, the mind of jealousy, pride, and so on. From those minds that we develop that are negative, we then have branches that are, coming out from that side of the tree that are essentially all of our actions that we commit on the basis of that, some of which are purely mental, some of which are actually verbal and physical. That's our karma. So when we look at it from the point of view of ignorance, gives rise to these negative states of mind, non-virtuous states. Those give rise to non-virtuous karma. And then the fruit that comes on that side of the tree is all kind of nasty and awful. It's the stuff that is rotten and worm infested. It's the suffering we have to experience. It is the result of all of that. On the other side of the tree, still grounded in ignorance, are all the virtuous states of mind that we generate. Because sentient beings, even without transcending their ignorance, can certainly generate virtue, right? We can have thoughts of kindness and compassion. We can be generous with others with that thought of wanting to benefit them to some degree. We do that with people in our immediate circle quite easily. We sometimes even extend out to other circles. So even ordinary beings have virtuous states of mind at times. And from that side of the tree that goes up virtuous, there are branches that come out that are all of our virtuous actions, all of our actual giving, all of our thoughts of giving that manifest in that form of wanting to benefit others through that virtuous thought. That produces all the delicious fruit. That's how you get good results in your life, is through engaging in virtuous actions. So this is the tree of samsara. We are sometimes creating all the positive stuff. Every one of you created an amazing action in your past life that led to you being here right now in human form, being able to have access to the Buddha Dharma through the kindness of our gurus and so on. All of this is there because you created the karma for it. Congratulate yourself that you have developed that side of your tree. But of course, we know we also have the garbage we deal with in our lives. That is evidence of still having delusions that are afflicted in nature, that are causing us to have non-virtuous states and engage in non-virtuous actions. And no doubt some of us still do some of those things, even though we know the Dharma inside and out. It's very hard to move the mind away from patterns of anger and so on. The purpose of looking at it this way, though, is to understand that all of it is rooted in ignorance. Even your having good results in samsara are still in samsara. They're still together with that mind that is not understanding how things actually exist. So if we ever want to be free from the round of existence, going from life to life and experience sometimes good fruit, sometimes bad fruit, sometimes things in the middle, but essentially this process of just, continuing to be in this tree, in this state of cyclic existence. Now, if we ever want to be free of that, we have to get at the roots. Now, yes, it helps to trim the branches. It helps to at least gain some control over this. We're going to see this in one of the verses coming up, is that it's good to teach sentient beings initially to stop engaging in, strengthening that side of the tree that results in more suffering. Why? Because you'll end up in unfortunate rebirths for eons, and you'll be separated from the Dharma, and you'll continue to create non-virtue, and it'll be very hard to find an existence like this again. But, we have to accentuate those virtuous things so we assure that we do have good rebirths as well, that our future lives have a continuity of good existences where we can partake of the Dharma and develop our wisdom and so on. So this is understanding that manipulate at this area too, but also recognize that we have to get at the root if we're ever going to be free of all of this. So that's essentially what this verse is saying, or this lines from the sutra, is that we need then these reasonings, these methods to realize shunyata, to realize emptiness. Out of the compassion of the Buddha, he's giving us all of this to work with. And there are a variety of techniques that we'll be examining that will help us to not wander in samsara, in this conditioned state of existence. So here I wanted to share just a little bit on this idea of having many different reasonings. Guy Newland, in a wonderful book called Introduction to Emptiness, it's not the end of it. It kind of goes on to say, as taught in the Lamrim Chenmo of Tsongkhapa, the great treatise on the stages of the path, which we will look at here and there. But Guy Newland, in this brief book that's an introduction to emptiness in that text, says, in meditative practice, we cannot be content to work through just one line of reasoning in an abbreviated form. We must use multiple lines of reasoning drawn from the treatises of Nagarjuna and other Madhyamikas. Madhyamika means the middle way. Those who follow the middle way that is between the two extremes that I alluded to a little bit earlier, the extreme of adhering to things as inherently existent, which keeps us in this state of nirvana, of samsara. But also we could fall into the other extreme where we think things don't exist at all. And again, I mentioned even some people have a nihilistic view of what nirvana means, that they think it's like a light being put out, a flame being exhausted, and that consciousness utterly ends and there's nothing afterwards. And of course, that would be a nihilistic view of the effect of meditating on emptiness. But emptiness itself obviously can be misunderstood as saying things don't exist at all. So again, the middle way, the Madhyamikas, are those who found that perfect middle line, that very thin line between these two extremes that we have to identify. And that's who we're going to be examining as part of this course. And we must feel ourselves, he says, being drawn deeply into the process of working through these reasonings again and again. So once more, a good reason for us to be spending this time together in these classes looking at these various reasonings. Only in this way can we develop strong conviction that the intrinsic self, the inherent self to which we normally cling, has never and could never exist at all. We need to get it at that level because we have to defeat this ignorance, that is, this misunderstanding of how the self and all phenomena exist. Now we go on to the next verse. Again, I'll do a few more verses and then we'll see if there are any questions. This is at the top of your second page of your little booklet. These verses, this one and the next one, are actually coming from Aryadeva's 400 stanzas, which is, Aryadeva was one of Nagarjuna's main disciples, and he didn't really write that much that I'm aware of. This is the main one that's been translated into English. There's a wonderful edition. Ruth Sonam did the translation, and then Geshe Sonam does the commentary, but it's got a translated commentary by Gyaltsab Je as well, which we're going to refer to in a moment. But he says here in this verse, those with little merit do not even doubt this teaching. Entertaining just a doubt, though, tears to tatters worldly existence. So there is this idea that if you even have little merit, you don't even doubt this teaching once you've come to see some of the truth to it. But even entertaining a doubt about it already begins to rip down the rafters of, cyclic existence. It tears it to tatters. I share this sometimes in any course on emptiness because I think it's comforting for people to hear this, that even if you're just doubting that things exist in the way that they appear, then that's already beginning to move you in the opposite direction. Even just a doubt, and we talked about doubt earlier, we have that doubt that is in those three stages, moving away from what is wrong, erroneous, towards what is more factual. Even just having that doubt that things exist in this way is already very powerful. So here I want to first share what Jeffrey Hopkins says on this passage in Meditation on Emptiness. He says, even a suspicion that emptiness, the lack of inherent existence, is the mode of being of phenomena, disturbs the very causes that produce the rounds of powerless suffering. For when one has such suspicion, the actual mode of being of objects acts for the slightest bit as an object of one's mind, meaning we are then able to bring to mind that things don't exist in that way. And even if you can bring that in a very, very superficial, cursory way in your daily life, it already begins to move you away from your conviction that things exist in the way they appear. We're going to talk more about this idea of the false appearance of things in a future class. But for tonight, just know that this is part of what the Buddha says is the problem, is that things also appear to be existing on their own, inherently, intrinsically. And we are believing in that. And so we need, these reasonings to move us in this direction. But even if the reasonings just begin to cause us to doubt that this is real in the way that we think it is, that's huge. That's like the beginning of moving off course. So that, like if you had something that's kind of moving in a direction, what is it called? The law of inertia. It just kind of keeps moving in the straight direction as long as the force is there. If we take it off a little bit, just even a little bit, just a small degree, it's way off to a larger degree over time, right? That little small, percentage of a degree that we could move something causes it to move in a much more revolutionary way further out as we continue to pursue it. Of course, just that doubt itself isn't going to get you very far. The doubt has to obviously keep moving in the direction that we talked about, becoming an equal doubt, becoming a doubt tending towards the factual, becoming a correct assumption, becoming an inferential cognition, becoming eventually the direct perception of emptiness. But this doubt is already getting us in the right direction. So let me share the commentary on this and then see where we're at. And again, we might just do some questions at that point. Again, this comes from that book, Gyaltsep Je's commentary on Aryadeva's text. This verse in particular, he says, "Those with little merit do not even have a doubt regarding the two truths as asserted by Nagarjuna, that while dependent arising is empty of inherent existence, all those things that do arise on the basis of various factors, we'll talk about that next week, everything that is a dependent arising lacks inherent existence," meaning these are mutually compatible. Things that arise dependently cannot have inherent or independent existence. That while that's occurring, actions and agents are feasible. Everything is feasible within this presentation of the middle way. And the two truths that are asserted are essentially that things do have that conventional way of existing, that is through dependence on factors, and they are empty in their ultimate mode of existence. They don't have any inherent existence. So even those with little merit don't have a doubt regarding that once they have begun to see the truth of that. But since they do not wonder whether this is so or not, how can they attain the liberation of having abandoned all disturbing attitudes and emotions? When emptiness is taught, simply entertaining the positive doubt that it might be so tears worldly existence to tatters, since to some extent the fundamental nature of existence has become the mind's object. Even if you're only bringing it in what might not be a perfect way yet, or might not be a clear understanding of emptiness yet, you're already bringing it into your field of awareness and thinking, maybe things don't exist in the way they appear. Maybe they do lack some of this concreteness from their own side, that way of existing. Someone who has such a positive doubt will seek certainty, and by ascertaining the correct view, that correct assumption through scriptural citations and reasoning, will attain liberation when disturbing attitudes and emotions come to an end. In other words, when they go through that whole process of moving from wrong consciousness all the way through to the direct realization, the direct perception of emptiness. And he says it's like the following analogy. I thought this was kind of an interesting one, so I'd share it. Sometimes these analogies are a little strange. This one, a little bit. A captain was captured by an ogress who took him, told him, I'm sorry, I made a typo putting this together today, who told him not to look toward the south. Feeling suspicious, he went that way and met the king of horses, Balahaka, escaped from the ogress and crossed the ocean. So just by kind of looking in the direction that the ogress told him not to, got him to look in that direction, just kind of increased his awareness of suspicion about what is there. someone who has such a positive doubt will seek, this is what I read earlier. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, I went back. Had he not been suspicious, this captain of the ship or whatever, he would not have escaped from the ogress, nor reached the other shore. This shows that even to attain just liberation, it is essential to understand the meaning of reality. In other words, we have to have some suspicion, something that kind of points us in that direction. So if you're new to these teachings on emptiness, maybe this is you kind of getting your initial nudge in that direction of wanting to question, how things actually exist. Let's go on to the next verse, and I think I'll be able to finish this, and then we'll see if there are any questions. This is actually supposed to be 135. Again, another typo. Sorry, I'm putting some typos in here, but as the tactile sense pervades the body, confusion is present in them all, meaning all the other senses. By overcoming confusion, one will also overcome all disturbing emotions. This is similar to the idea of the roots of the tree that I mentioned earlier, right? So the analogy here is what is called the tactile sense or the body sense. You have your other four senses, which again are your eye sense, ear sense, nose sense, and tongue sense. Those are also pervaded by the body sense, right? Because you can touch your tongue and you can, feel the pressure on your tongue from your finger, or you could, touch your nose sense and your eyes and what have you. There is tactile sensation within all of those organs, with all of those senses. So in the same way, confusion, ignorance is present in all of our afflictions. It's present even together with our virtuous minds, as I pointed out, but it's certainly present in all the delusions, the afflictions that we're trying to combat, those that again are non-virtuous because they're the mind of attachment, desire, anger, hatred, jealousy, pride, and so on, all the other secondary afflictions, what have you. So by overcoming confusion, because it's the root, because it pervades all of those, one will also overcome all disturbing emotions. So let's go through the commentary on this quickly. The question that's asked, the different characteristics of desire and anger have been described because that was what was covered in the text just prior to this. But what are the various characteristics of confusion? The answer is, in the body, the tactile sense organ pervades all other sense organs, such as the eye. Again, another typo. Sorry, I was typing this really quickly today. I'll have to go back and do my editing. And acts as a basis without which none of the others could exist. If you didn't have the body sense power throughout all of this, the other organs wouldn't have a basis upon which they are established. Confusion, which is a disturbing attitude ignorance, misconceives, again, those dependent arisings, those things that arise in dependence upon other factors that are actually free from inherent existence, as if they truly existed, as if they were true to our awareness apprehending them on the basis of how they appear. It similarly is present in and pervades all disturbing emotions such as desire and anger. Misconceiving things distorted by confusion as inherently pleasant or unpleasant, one thinks of them as desirable or repugnant. So this is what we're doing, is we're mistakenly adhering to the identity of things, but when we have anger or attachment present, we are kind of getting the experience of those objects, and we think that they are inherently the way that we experience them. So the mind of attachment thinks that things are inherently pleasurable, and the mind of anger thinks that they're inherently unpleasurable. Those qualities are even seen as inherently existent. That's because, again, inherent existence, this clinging to this, is the underwriting root of all of these. We are clinging to things ourselves to inherently exist, the objects to inherently exist, and the qualities within those objects to inherently exist. But of course, this can be disproven very easily, because look at all the things you find pleasurable. I always use music as an example because of my own attachment to music. But look at the music that you find really pleasurable. Does everybody on the planet find it pleasurable? No, because we know everybody likes different types of music, right? And there may be something that we like that other people would hate, but they would like it and we would hate it. So which is it? Is it inherently pleasurable, unpleasurable? We could get into whole arguments about this if we wanted to have a whole war on music, if we wanted to, go to that level. But obviously, there's nothing inherently in the object that makes them pleasurable or unpleasurable. The object itself doesn't have any of that. It even doesn't have its own inherent identity. So this is how ignorance is playing a role in the two minds of anger and attachment, which are the two of the other three root delusions or root poisons. And all the other delusions come from them. All the other afflicted states of mind arise from those together with ignorance. So he says then, thus, one must understand how the mode of apprehension entailed in the conception of true existence is present in the modes of apprehension of anger and desire. In other words, the way you're thinking about things with your ignorance is also present in the way you're thinking about things when anger and desire are present. All other disturbing attitudes and emotions depend on the disturbing attitude ignorance, which is principle. It's the root. Everything else is arising from it. By overcoming confusion through meditation on dependent arising empty of inherent existence, all other disturbing attitudes and emotions will be overcome as well. Therefore, make effort to understand emptiness as the meaning of dependent arising. This is what we're going to examine next week. For instance, by cutting down a poisonous tree, everything useless associated with it ceases. There, voila, the analogy I just used of a tree. Maybe we could call the whole tree of samsara poisonous, even though we do get some good fruit from the one side of it. Nonetheless, it really is all useless when it comes down to it in terms of it's not bringing us any great advantage. But nonetheless, it is what we have to work with in order to transcend it, in order to actually cut down the entire tree. So let's stop there, and we'll continue next week with that verse, which is without negating the object of this conception of self. It's on page 2, kind of the middle of the page. Any questions or comments on what we talked about tonight? Have a few minutes. Have I discouraged anybody from continuing in this? I hope not. I hope it's inspiring to begin to like this first class again was really just to help you to gain an appreciation for why we need to do this. We're going to have a few more verses on that, but it's so central to our path, and it's so important to remove everything else that is clouding our minds, as well as our ability to benefit others. Anyone, anything else you'd like to add to this? Okay. I'm not seeing any hands up, so I'm just going to proceed. Then why don't we go ahead, since, we're only a few minutes away from 8:15. What I would encourage you to do, maybe I'll talk a little bit about what I'd like you to do as homework. I will, again, send out a reading list of one of the most important books I think that anybody who wants to study emptiness seriously, who they should have. Certainly Meditation on Emptiness, as I've quoted a few times, is a great book to have, but the structure of it is a little hard for people sometimes. This wonderful book called Insight into Emptiness by Geshe Jampa Tekchok. I will be making more quotes from this, and I will be using this on occasion. It has some wonderful ways of approaching all these various topics of emptiness. It does get very technical. If you haven't studied emptiness before, this may not be like the first book to go to. If you're new to emptiness, you're going to get lots of deep water stuff sometimes, through this course, but know that there's a wonderful book by His Holiness called How to See Yourself as You Really Are, which is what we actually use in the Discovering Buddhism course when we study emptiness, which, guess what? That's also coming up. I'm doing lots of emptiness in these few months, first few months. Next Saturday, not this Saturday, because we have Labab Duchen, but the next Saturday, we begin the Discovering Buddhism module on emptiness. And if you are feeling like this is a little too heady and you're not sure that you have enough grounding in emptiness to be able to navigate these verses and what have you, that may be a better place for you to start. Or you could do them both in tandem. That course where we're looking at an introduction to emptiness and using His Holiness's book, as well as this where we're doing a little bit deeper investigation and getting into the actual techniques of reasoning. We'll touch on some of that in the DB course as well, but I just thought I'd point that out so that you're aware of that. All right, let's go ahead and do our dedication prayers then. I think Mary will get those up on the screen so we can have those to read. So again, the very first prayer that's on the screen is the dedication of all this positive potential so that we attain the state that we are aiming for, that we were motivated towards at the beginning of class tonight, the state of Buddhahood, where with our perfect wisdom and our perfect compassion and skillful means, we will be able to lead all beings to the actualization of their own Buddhahood. So let's recite that verse together. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And then the next verse, which is the desire to have this mind of bodhicitta increase and develop in our own hearts and in the hearts of all others, especially in the hearts of our leaders and of the world at this time. We see how much we need this kind of compassionate motivation, not just for ourselves, but for all beings. And wouldn't it be wonderful if all of our world leaders would be imbued with this compassionate wish to benefit others? May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Then we're going to do just a couple of prayers for our teachers, starting with His Holiness, and we'll also do for Lama Zopa, and I think for Osalhita, Lama Yeshe's reincarnation. But as we recite these, think about all the teachers that exist that are helping beings to develop either of these wings, to develop their compassion, to develop their wisdom. They might be in other traditions even. May these spiritual guides continue to have good health and long lives, and may we and others always have perfect guides in all our lifetimes. So we start with His Holiness, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Then we do the prayer for Lama Zopa Rinpoche, our spiritual director. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjuna's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then we go on again to Osalhita, Lama Yeshe's reincarnation. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Okay, so thank you for those prayers. And I realize I didn't really say much more about what else to do during the next week. If you want to review these verses, and again, some of these you may be able to even bring into a meditation, even though this is still a bit introductory, to kind of think about the necessity of this wisdom in your own mind and examine, if you can already, the ignorance that is operating to see that we need this wisdom in order to be free from samsara ourselves, but also to help all beings to be free from that. So if you want to meditate on the verses we've covered, you'd be welcome to do that, certainly. So have a good however many days till I see you again. Again, I'll be teaching up in Taos tomorrow night. No emptiness teachings. I'll be teaching on Rinpoche's little daily practice that I taught on at TNL earlier this year. But again, hopefully see you on Saturday at some of the events for Labab Duchen, and then Sunday. But blessings to you. Be well. Everyone stay safe.